Welcome, everyone. Good morning for joining today's webinar about China. This is the agenda for today. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes on describing the overall shape of China's post-COVID recovery before diving a little bit deeper into both industrial production landscape and the consumption landscape, which are the two key pillar driving forces of economic recovery. Then we'll spend some time on real estate sector, particularly because real estate sector is so much important to China's overall economy. It accounts for nearly 30% of the entire GDP. Lastly, we'll spend some time on China's government fiscal drive, because this is really a very unique year for local governments after spending so much resources on zero COVID policies in the past 3 years. At the end of the webinar, we'll leave a couple of minutes for questions and answers. So as Adam mentioned, please just type in any questions you have via the chat functions. With that, let me start with the overall shape of China's post-COVID recovery. There are some key takeaways here. Obviously, the two sessions we had last month in early March saw President Xi Jinping officially started his third term. That is no surprise at all. And of course, a longtime ally of his, Li Qiang, became premier. Li Qiang, obviously, who was the Shanghai's party secretary before moving to Beijing, and has been working together with Mr. Xi for about 20 years. So overall, a new team has taken over in China's State Council. Basically, there's a new government who are going to oversee China's post-COVID recovery. Now, at the two sessions, this new team set a pretty conservative growth target for 2023, which is 5%. This is one of the lowest goals in decades. We all know that China set like 5.5% target for last year, but missed it by quite a big margin. So 5% for this year is viewed as very conservative. There's also a 3% goal for fiscal deficit. Our view is that this means Beijing this year is quite unlikely to stimulate the economy very aggressively like before. When it comes to industrial production, we have to say that there has been market improvement since the Chinese New Year holidays, but it is far from a full recovery. This road will be long and bumpy. There are factors both domestic and abroad. Domestically, we mentioned about this 3% of fiscal deficit target, and globally, there is going to be a weakening demand around the whole world this year. Consumption, on the other hand, has also shown positive signs, and our view is that it will continue to grow. Particularly, recovery will be quite strong in the second half of this year. However, within consumption, the recovery itself will be pretty uneven, because consumers, in our view, will be spending much more on services than on goods. Lastly, there has been some green shoots in the property market. We could say that this sector has bottomed out, but the structural issues in this sector still exist. So it is no longer going to be a pillar growth for China in the next few years. It is just avoided being a total collapse. Now, let me delve into the overall shape of China's post-COVID recovery. At the two sessions, as always, every year, that is the occasion for the central government to set out a set of economic targets for this year. GDP target, we mentioned about that, which is 5%, and this is, of course, catching everybody's eyeballs, so I've highlighted in red. Fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, 3% is only slightly higher than the 2.8 last year. We mentioned just now that this means China is quite unlikely to go on a spending spree on the supply side just to boost the economic recovery by building. There's also another goal catching people's eyeballs is the jobs to create, which is 12 million. Now, it looks a lot, but don't forget there's going to be more than 11 million university graduates leaving campus this year and entering the job force. And last year, there was already over 10 million university graduates into the job market, and about half of them are still without a job this year. We do have a slide about unemployment coming up later on, but this is something really to keep an eye on. This is a big challenge for China's economic recovery for this year. But overall, what we can see that this 5% of GDP growth is the lowest in decades, and it is quite conservative. Barring some really big shocks, there shouldn't be any difficulties for China, for this new government to hit this target by the end of this year. Now, this is what we see in our eyes as how overall economic recovery will be playing out throughout the year. Now that we're entering into Q2 and COVID was declared over in early March by China's government. So this is already behind the whole nation. Starting from Q2, situations are already normalizing, and we are predicting some bigger momentum for economic recovery in the second half of this year. But amongst the different economic drivers that we usually talk about, consumer spending, in our view, will be the main pillar for China's recovery this year. For the simple reason that investment, government spending will be constrained by that 3% goal, and the exports will be really, really weighed down by the weakening global demand. Our colleagues in the global team are forecasting actually a shallow recession in US and Europe this year, followed only by a very moderate recovery, given that those two external markets are China's biggest customers in terms of made in China goods. So exports this year for China will be really weak. Now, as the year progresses, we've listed out a couple of things to watch because how they develop are going to have a pretty big impact on how China recovers this year. Number one, real estate sector support package. We'll delve into this topic a little bit deeper later on, but this is important because it's just so huge in China's economy. Number two, whether China is going to have a more business-friendly environment after several years of zero-COVID lockdowns and regulatory crackdowns. This is actually a big question mark in many executives' minds. Now, China's new Premier Li Qiang, who has just been in his job for about a month, has been repeatedly sending out business-friendly messages in the past month. This is, of course, a very good indicator for where China's policies will go. But given what's happened in the past few years, our understanding is that many multinationals are still adopting a wait and see stance, which is completely understandable. Lastly, the weakening global demand. Now, this is, of course, out of China's control. This was really stirred up by US Fed's very aggressive rate hike since last year. And there was also the war between Russia and Ukraine, which pushed up the cost of raw materials. Under the impact of these two factors, the global demand is weakening and will continue to weaken this year. And that will weigh down on China's exports. So this is the overall
Thomas,
picture.
if I could just interject, we got a question. I think it was on top of I think it was on the back of your second point under what to watch with regards to the business-friendly environment.
Yes.
So the question was, Premier Li has sent numerous messages recently to assure international investors that China's open for business. But have you seen any specific policies rolled out so far?
Thanks for the question. The short answer is no. I think this is understandable. It's because he's only been in this new job for a year. And given what China has experienced the past 3 years, his first month really was spent mostly focusing on sending out reassuring messages to the market. He talked to private business, China's domestic private businesses, and he talked to numerous CEOs and senior executives of very huge multinationals who visited China in March. So the first month for him was really to focus on sending out the messages, but I think it's quite fair to say that we need to give him a bit more time to roll out specific and detailed policies to support those messages.
Hi, my name is Krista Reganey, and I'm Marketing Director here at FrontierView. I'd like to thank you for watching a segment of this webinar. If you'd like access to the full video and our latest insights, data, and research, sign up for a free trial with us today. Simply scan the QR code on the screen.